Hello there, YouTube. I noticed Roblester bringing up a lot of old Gorilla199 videos recently, and I thought I'd give him a bit of support in that I studied classics and archaeology for 3 years, so I kind of know what I'm talking about in rebuking some of these ridiculous arguments. So let's have a look, shall we? This may sound finicky and nitpicky, so I thought I'd get it out of the way first. I have never heard it pronounced Apollyon. I've always heard it pronounced Apollo. And Helions, or whatever you pronounce it as, is Helios, as I've been told. And you can't really use the name Helios to refer to Apollo. They are, in fact, because Helios is basically his headgear. A lot of depictions of Apollo have him with the Helios disc on his head and as a kind of a hat, because that is indeed what Greeks supposedly believed. Probably didn't, because they were a lot cleverer than that. And yeah, so if you're going to start naming people after their headgear, I better be prepared to be called Mr. Top Hat in future. In my time studying archaeology and classics, around on ancient history in general, I came across a wide variety of people with a wide variety of beliefs. None of them were any, although there were many religions, few lack religion of any kind. There were many religions, including Christians, and yet none of them were scriptural literalists. Why? Because if you know anything about ancient history, it's pretty much impossible to be a scriptural literalist. To accept the historicity outright of a document like the Bible. It's ridiculous. When you're looking at previous chapters of the Bible, we know for a fact that the whole of the Noah's Ark story in Genesis was basically ripped off a much earlier myth of the Sumerians. Or was it it's the Babylonians, yes, and I think they ripped it off the Sumerians. And it is referring to a historical event, but it wasn't a worldwide flood by any stretch of the imagination. It was a massive flood. I'll give you that. It was huge. It took, if you were living around the coast of the Mediterranean at that time, about 6,000. You'd have been fucked. So maybe there is a story of a guy who had a boat full of animals, and it's possible that may or may not have happened. However, also within this time period you have people like Plato, who many Christian philosophers follow, who famously said that so long as something is morally true, it's as good as outright true, which is typical bollocks from Plato, frankly. And thus he came up with this concept of aletheos logos, or moral truth being equal to regular truth, and that's muddied the waters a bit. Then, of course, you look at the fact that the version of the Bible we have today, although we've got lots and lots of different original documents which the modern translations are transcribed from, is an edition agreed on by the Catholic, or in some cases the Orthodox. Well, this is before the Catholic Orthodox split, so it's the central body of the Church agreed on a set of scriptures. Now, I always used to go on about how, oh, this was censored, that was censored, this was censored, that was censored. But really, when it comes to biblical censorship, I do accept that to a degree there was a level of, can we prove this historically, can we not? Does this marry up with that? And they were only really doing their job. So it's not so much censorship as sort of what we do in modern history. We try and weed out the bullshit. And among the things that very nearly didn't make it into the Bible is the revelation of St. John the Divine. Or backstory about St. John the Divine, a few people may be interested in. He was the youngest of Jesus' disciples. He was also referred to in many passages as the beloved of Christ. Now, you can imagine what a liberal Christian like me could do with a quote like that. Plus, there are references to his previous life before meeting Jesus that are somewhat, shall we say, unkosher. But, yeah, St. John the Divine, well, if it really was written by St. John the Divine, which I don't think we have confirmation it was written down by him. It may have been passed down to whoever wrote it, but it probably wasn't written down by him. Most of the disciples were illiterate, with the exception of a couple who were tax collectors. None of them really had a need to write anything, because they were working people. They weren't scholars. They weren't religious lawyers. They weren't the sort of people who are currently at the heads of the church. But that's a discussion for another time. So we don't know if St. John the Divine wrote this. We do know that in the region that it was the original revelations were sort of transcribed and discovered and eventually made their way into the main Bible document, there was a trend for the use of hallucinogenic substances as a way of unlocking spiritual experience. That's right, this whole thing could well have been written on magic mushrooms. So you're using a book that, in all possibility, Gorilla199, could have been written by a guy who was either getting it second hand or just tripping on magic mushrooms and then attributing it to a biblical figure. And it's no wonder they very nearly didn't put this in, because it's probably one of the most confusing and hard to verify books in there. Whereas you've got these histories that tie up with Xerxes and all these other figures who we know existed, and Ramesses and all these other. When you're talking about Revelation, there is very little proof that St. John the Divine ever said anything like this. Certainly that he ever wrote anything like this. We don't even know if he could write. And the magic mushrooms thing just makes me even more skeptical. So, yeah, that's Revelations for you. I'm stepping slightly outside my field of study here, but it's not like Gorilla199 has a field of study. So I think I can be excused for that. Also, whilst I was doing classics and archaeology, I took a few wild modules on the history of science fiction because it's something that's always interested me. Contrary to what I think Roblester said, the grey image has not predates the use of that image in sci-fi. The earliest account I can find is referenced in Terry Deary's so-called true UFO stories, and the gentleman who wrote that account wrote it in about 1930 something, about incident that happened in allegedly happened in 1923. There are, even if this gentleman is telling the truth, there are various psychological explanations for why we have that shape, why that shape just resonates so well for us as an alien. Also, there are other theories that speculate perhaps this is a glimpse into sort of humanity's evolution. As the brain expands, I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of us have been getting bigger heads and being a lot cleverer in each generation. Brain expands and mouth shrinks because supposedly once the brain expands, it has less need to use the mouth to communicate. I'm skeptical about that, but and the eyes grow larger because considering how much we use our eyes, humans actually have quite small eyes, because our hearing and our smell really aren't up to much in terms. So that's an interesting idea. Other ideas include the idea of a grey aliens species that have been allegedly picking up random drunk hillbillies and anal probing them for 60 years, which is probably bullshit. The problem with an alien invasion idea, and this idea still comes up, will still be with us until we manage to find a way past the light barrier, which probably I can see it happening, but with some of the recent discoveries in physics, but that's still a problem. The fact that you've got everything so spaced out in space, especially in this part of the galaxy, which is a bit of a backwater, that why an alien species would want to come all the way over to this particular backwater just to troll us, basically, is completely beyond reasoning. I can't see a reason myself. We aren't a particularly advanced civilization. We have started shooting radio signals up, but when you look at a lot of alien abduction stories, some of them bear a lot of resemblance to previous stories of changeling abductions and basically fairy abductions. But I think I've said this before, but fairies are not the nice little things they are portrayed to be in most modern fiction. Historically, fairies have been very malicious creatures that just generally fuck with humanity because they can. And most traditional stories of these creatures, I won't use fairy stories because that's got a different connotation now, they are assholes. It's almost they're on a par with some of the old pagan gods as to how just downright malevolent they are. I mean, I can't really think of any creature in mythology quite as nasty and despised and universal as a fairy, because it's not just Europe that got them. It's another one of these ones that's universal, a bit like a dragon, only dragons look slightly different in China than they do over here for some reason. And on the monoped, of course, which has got a whole different story behind it. But fairies are considered to be particularly malicious creatures, and before we had UFO kidnap stories, we had fairy kidnap stories, and the last reference I've seen to a fairy kidnap story ended very tragically with a murder, where a man in Ireland was convinced that his wife had been replaced by a changeling or a fairy duplicate. A fairy duplicate that was 1 inch taller, apparently. And he went and he hanged for that, I believe. This was only at the turn of the century, 1902, I think it was. So, yeah, it's as the sort of the fairy idea was debunked and debunked and debunked. I'll admit, during the beginning of the 20th century, there was a fashion for it, even with some supposedly skeptical thinkers like Arthur Conan Doyle buying into this idea. And there are the famous faked photographs of the little girls. Yeah, as fairies gradually got debunked, we moved into aliens, because aliens are slightly more believable. And I say it slightly with a lot of conviction there, because, as I said, you have the problem of distance, and you have the problem of this is a backwater with no particularly unique resources or interest for an advanced civilization. Then if civilization could get here, why would they want to come here? Basically, that's the central question that hasn't been answered by any UFO theorists. And then, of course, you have these people like Gorilla199 who claim all these alien stories are demon stories. Demons, like changelings, have a long history, and I've heard some strange things about demons and possession. I'm still unconvinced that most of these, if not all of these, are just undiagnosed mental illnesses. Various psychoses that have been repressed, particularly when it happens within a very religious community. Because when it's in a very religious community, any sort of deviation from the norm is immediately picked up on. Any sort of, well, not necessarily just independent thought, but real deviation from the norm is really picked up on. And yeah, you have these. It's a very sort of a paranoid society. So within that, it's very easy to come up with demon stories. And really, the idea of somebody in the developed world coming up is not too far-fetched for me, because to see these people, whereas other people are saying, oh, if this is supposed to be a mostly secular country, how on earth can we have somebody here who's a... It's not too surprising for me, because desperate times breed, as I said, sort of strange ideas, and demons are just one of them. So, by conspiracy theory standards, this idea of Apollo equals the Antichrist idea is shockingly badly researched. It's bringing in modern theories that are maybe somewhat more plausible in an attempt to justify itself with the Greys. Now, we know the Greys also is most likely bollocks. So really, it's bollocks on top of bollocks on top of bollocks, and it isn't actually grounded in any kind of history or empirical fact. I don't expect any to sort of deprogram any rabid Gorilla199 fans through this video. This is mainly made for my own entertainment and to show my support for Roblester. But please, please do take a look at ancient history. It's a lot of fun. It will challenge you if you take a lot of various scriptures literally, but what is Christianity if not a constant challenge? That's how I see it. That's how even people at my fundy church see it. That's what it is. It's the challenge. And in fact, I should rename it the challenge because that would sound a lot better. Anyhow, Anyhow, do a bit of reading round, work it out for yourselves, and yeah, have a good one, folks.